In advance of New Hampshire, the New Hampshire polls, as well as the national polls, seem to be moving in the right direction for Bernie Sanders. He still has, if you take a look at this, you're gonna see not only is he doing well in those polls, but also who do you think has the best chance of winning in November? So this is for New Hampshire. He has gained 9 points since just about like 2 weeks ago, a little bit more than 2 weeks ago. Biden has dropped 16 points in that time, getting towards half of his support in that metric. And considering how much conversation there's been about electability, who you believe is gonna win seems pretty important. And Iowa seems to have hurt Biden there, helped Sanders a little bit. But as these numbers are moving in the right direction for him, you can expect that the about a month-long campaign against Bernie Sanders that we've seen from more media and political figures from the establishment be feeling more freed to attack him is continuing. So James Carville had an interview about Bernie Sanders, about how he says, let me show you one of the headlines. Former Clinton advisor says Sanders and Warren push stupid ideas in expletive-heavy interview. To give you an idea of what it was like, I'm not gonna show you a whole bunch of it, but he talks about how plans to provide free college is stupid, that not only will it not drive support for his candidacy, but in fact will cause a backlash against him, which is an interesting take. So yeah, the ideas are stupid. Also, he doesn't want to support Bernie Sanders because he doesn't want to be a part of a cult. And so that is James Carville. Now, not 100% from the James Carville thing, but this attack against Bernie Sanders that we've been seeing more and more of. Nina Turner, one of the top surrogates for Bernie Sanders, was on MSNBC just earlier today, and she was asked to respond to some of these attacks. Take a look at this.
The majority of Democrats who helped flip the House in 2018 were moderates. James Carville made the argument over the weekend that Senator Sanders isn't a Democrat, he's an ideologue, and we've got to get practical. If he is the candidate, he is not going to be able to help win over the Senate. And unless you have the Senate, if you've just got the White House, you ain't gonna get nothing done.
Stephanie, does practical mean that the 89 or so million people who are uninsured or underinsured in this country continue to suffer? Does being practical mean that we don't take steps in this country to deal with climate chaos and bring world leaders to bear? Does being practical mean that we continue to prop up a legal system that is unjust in every stretch of the imagination, that bears its weight down on black men and black women, and then by extension, if you are Hispanic or indigenous or poor? Does being practical mean that we don't say to the American people that you deserve better than what you are getting? That's not the kind of practicality we want. Does practical mean that you hold fundraisers and wine caves with Swarovski crystals with billionaires who want to control this system? Does practical mean we continue to go with the status quo while 500,000 people sleep on the streets at night? That's not practicality. So with all due respect to Mr. Carville, what the American people in this country need, they need somebody that is unabashed and that has the courage and the conviction to stand up for them and to call out the rigging of this system, and that candidate is Senator Bernie Sanders.
Okay, so probably goes without saying that I absolutely love that. It was great. She should be running right now. But anyway, so look, the question that was set up from, I believe it's Stephanie Ruhle, was like sort of worded as this is what James Carville is saying. I'm not sure when she says Bernie Sanders is not gonna help win the Senate, it wasn't clear if she was quoting James Carville there, if she was simply stating it. But it's out there now as an idea, and I'm gonna return to that in one sec. Before that though, I wanna go to one more bit of video, and this is, again, a very weird framing coming from Stephanie Ruhle about Bernie Sanders supporters.
Senator Sanders supporters, what is their #1 goal? Is it to start this revolution, or is it to defeat Donald Trump? And I ask because there's often a lot of talk around, will those supporters get behind another candidate if it's not Senator Sanders?
Stephanie, why can't we have both? You know, that same argument was made in 2016.
And a lot of those people didn't vote for
However, though, Stephanie, more of Senator Sanders' supporters supported Secretary Hillary Clinton than her supporters supported then Senator Barack Obama. So let's set the record straight. People do want to defeat President Donald Trump, but they also want to know that they're going to have a fighter in the White House that's going to take it all the way, that's going to go ham on this system that has oppressed them. And so I reject, and so do the American people, the whole notion that you cannot say to a system that it must change and also push a dream and a vision that is bigger than what we have right now. Who wants somebody that's saying to the workaday people of this nation, I'm going to run for office, but you only going to get more of the same? That doesn't work. We're going to win this stuff.
Okay, so that again was great. Again, goes without saying. So the idea that Bernie Sanders is a nominee means you can't win the Senate. And right there, well, I just want to know from Bernie Sanders supporters, do they want this revolution or do they want to beat Donald Trump? Like, I would love for one of these hosts just consider the possibility that those two things are not necessarily disconnected. And in particular, before you ask a question like that, and you add on to it the constant refrain of, will they say they will support another candidate if it's not Bernie Sanders? When Bernie Sanders himself has said that he will support the eventual candidate if it's not him more than everyone else in the field combined. If you're gonna ask that to the supporters of a candidate, doesn't it seem a little bit weird to ask it to the supporters of the candidate who got the most votes in Iowa, who's currently leading in New Hampshire, 538, says has the best chance of clinching the nomination? Honestly, if you're gonna ask it to the supporters of any candidate, the leading candidate is who you're gonna ask it of, not of like Klobuchar supporters or Yang supporters or Warren supporters or anyone else who doesn't have nearly as good of a chance of winning, and thus those supporters are more likely to have to actually act on their beliefs. No. Ask it to Bernie Sanders, pretend that he's not winning. And in terms of, her response was great, that those two things are connected, that the person who is most in the corner of working people, who brings in the most new voters, who clearly would help to take the Senate, when they say, do they actually care about beating Donald Trump or do they just want the revolution? Look, you know the recent polls over the past month that show that he regularly beats Donald Trump. But I wanna go back further than that. I wanna go back to literally 5 years of head-to-head polls between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. Take a look at this graphic. This is Real Clear Politics. This is going back to October of 2015. There is like a 1 week span in there where they found a poll where Donald Trump beat Bernie Sanders. Aside from that, and sometimes with massive gaps between the two, for half a decade, he's been beating Donald Trump in these head-to-head polls. And I wanna get that tattooed on my face and show up on CNN and MSNBC so that they can't avoid acknowledging that all of the empirical evidence that we have shows that not only is Bernie Sanders a good candidate electorally to go against Donald Trump, but all of the evidence shows that he's been regularly beating him year after year after year after year. And how can you continue to frame questions pretending not only that you don't understand that you haven't seen those numbers, but that the opposite necessarily must be true because you personally as a host don't support Bernie Sanders. That is insane at this late date that they're still doing that. We're not in the early part of the primary. He already won the popular vote in Iowa. He already looks like he's gonna win the popular vote in New Hampshire. He is very well placed for Super Tuesday as well. To keep pretending that he is some low tier outsider candidate that has no chance, that is absurd. And thankfully there are people like Nina Turner going out there and making that clear. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.